In my previous video about wartime Hong Kong, I complained that there are very few photos available from that time, but I missed one group who were regular photographers, American pilots. They flew many missions over Hong Kong, taking aerial photos like this one. In some cases, the photos were used to help identify targets for future bombing raids, and at other times the photos were taken after raids to check if the targets had been hit. A couple of things to note. Down the bottom here we've got the letters L, V and the arrow. As far as I can tell, letter L stands for left, showing that this photo is taken by the plane's left camera, and the arrow shows which direction the plane is flying. Then after the film was developed, someone's written this text along the edge of the negative, and we'll take a closer look at that later. Now they use very good cameras, so we get a really sharp image. We can zoom in and see, for example, the paddy fields here and the village houses nearby. Now I wonder if you can recognize where this picture was taken. It's much easier if we overlay the photo on a modern map. Here it is. We're flying over the new territories and we're looking down at the land around Hebe Haven, which is the inlet just here. This is photo number 16 in a series, and happily we've got several others so we can follow the flight. Starts off over quite barren land really, just heading over the hills. And then we come to the edge of the airfield at Kai Tak, continue across Kowloon Bay into Kowloon, turn down over Chim Sa Choi, and then head across the harbour, Wan Chai. We continue south, but something important's changed just here. I mean, it looks like we're just flying in a straight line down here, but the LV that was on the right of all the photos is now on the left. So what's happened is the plane has come down here, made a turn, and is now flying back up over the centre of the island, and our last photo has it over Quarry Bay. To get the full coverage, we've got a second set of photos from the plane's right-hand camera, and that's the full set. Let's take a closer look at the writing along the edge here. Now these are the captions from all the photos taken by the left camera. Here's the LV again. The next number shows this photo's place in the sequence, so we start off with photo 16 and we finish off with photo 36. I've been told that all these photos were taken on the 1st of February 1945, so I think that's our next column. February the 1st, the American style, and then the last four digits here, these are the time it was taken. So between 12:30 and 12:40. The last column notes the items of interest in the photos. In this case, they're highlighting the Kai Tak aerodrome and the various dockyards around Hong Kong. Over the longer term then, the reason the American Air Force was bombing Hong Kong was to try to prevent Japanese convoys from delivering raw materials from their newly acquired Japanese territories in Southeast Asia. Think petroleum from the Dutch East Indies and rubber from Malaya, taking that back to the factories in Japan that supplied the Japanese armed forces. American bombers attacked Japanese ships in Hong Kong's harbour and also attacked the dockyards that could be used to build and repair those ships. Now the Americans didn't have the sky to themselves, as there were Japanese fighters at Kai Tak and other airfields in southern China that would try to intercept the American planes and shoot them down, so the American bombers attacked the airfields too. Here are the photos overlaid on Gulo's maps. Let's go to the full screen, get a larger view. There isn't much of interest in this northern section, although the Americans might have been looking out for any shipping taking shelter up here in these bays. I don't see any on these photos though, so the first item of interest is the airfield down at Kai Tak. The Japanese had significantly expanded the airfield they'd acquired back in December 1941. They've reclaimed land to the south and flattened land to the north, and then they've built these two runways, one here and one here. Around the edge of the airfield, all the little horseshoe shapes we can see, these are the revetments to give aircraft some protection from attacking airplanes. If we look down at the three at the bottom left here, We can see the shapes of airplanes taking shelter there, so possibly the American pilot had the skies to himself on this day. If we continue flying south, we come to the first of the dockyards. They don't catch the whole dockyard, but they get the important part, which was the big dry dock. And it looks like there's a pretty large ship in the dry dock when this picture was taken. Off to the northeast, we've got the Cosmopolitan docks at Tai Kok Choi. That one had a much smaller dry dock that we can see here, and just 2 small boats in it on this day. Heading south across the harbour, we come to the first of the dockyards on the island. This in previous years was the Royal Navy's dockyard, the Japanese Navy using it now. Their dry dock here has a large ship in the dry dock, and from the shadow here it looks like the dry dock is empty of water. So the ship undergoing some sort of repairs. Now Hong Kong's oldest dry docks were down about here, where Aberdeen Centre is today, but unfortunately just off the edge of the photos, so we don't get to look at those. The last ones we do get to see are over in Quarry Bay, and that's the big Tai Kung dockyard. During peacetime, this area here, this would be the shipbuilding yards, but by early 1945, Hong Kong faced shortages of just about everything, so building new ships was pretty much out of the question. Over here we have the big dry dock, and there's another large ship inside. And then below that there were 3 slips where you could pull ships up out of the water to do work on them. It looks like perhaps a medium-sized ship up here, nothing on the middle one, and then 2 smaller boats down the bottom here. So full marks to the pilots for his photos. He's got a good view of the airfield and covered most of the key dockyard facilities too. Now I wonder if we can know more about the pilot and perhaps even who the pilot was. So let's switch back to those captions again. This section here, the 21 PR, I believe this identifies this plane as coming from the 21st Photographic Reconnaissance Squadron, part of the American 14th Air Force, more commonly known as the Flying Tigers. Now, they flew from airfields in China, and Hong Kong was one of their regular targets. Do any of the other parts of the caption tell us more about the plane or even identify the pilot? We've got 5MB5 here, and then over here we've got 24:3500 and A:/SL.ME. Now I've seen it suggested that the 3500 refers to the altitude of the plane, flying at 30,500 feet. But I'm not sure if that's true or what the other parts mean, so if you do know how to decode these, please let us know in the comments below. The only other part of the caption is the little arrow and the N at the front, and that's an easy one. It just points to north, so it just shows you which way to rotate the photos so they line up with the maps. Next, I wondered if any of the wartime diaries on Gulo mentioned this flight, or if perhaps the pilot saw Stanley Camp. If we look at these are all the diary pages written on the 1st of February. The only one that mentions planes is the first one, R.E. Jones. He says, planes and thumps heard, but no air raid warnings. So again, if there were no air raid warnings, perhaps the American pilot really was left in peace during his flight over Hong Kong. Now Jones mentions the weather was overcast and then clears up in the afternoon. So here's the Stanley Peninsula at the bottom. We can see the Stanley Prison, its distinctive shape here, and then the internment camp where the Japanese interned the Allied civilians. That's this land all around here. But unfortunately on the day the plane flew over, it was still cloudy. We haven't got to the afternoon when the cloud clears away. So R.E. Jones didn't see the plane, and sadly for us, the plane doesn't see Stanley Camp either. What else can we see? Let's start with the Japanese changes to Hong Kong. Kai Tak is the most obvious. Not just the extension of the airfield, but also the big nullah that the Japanese built around the perimeter. It's mostly just flat land, but there are a couple of buildings that stand out. Up at the top here, there's this large rectangular building, and it's linked to the main airfield by this crossing here, running across the nullah and across the main road and then into the airfield. The building here was an aircraft hangar. It was recycled from an earlier British civilian hangar that stood on the pre-war airfield. Now, looking over here, there is another crossing, and this one got me quite excited. I thought at first this was the old runway extension that still exists today, and I was thinking, oh, that's interesting to see it was here so early. But if we compare it with the modern map, we can see this is the runway extension, and it's actually quite a bit further north. And as expected, it lines up with Chirklock Street, which in turn lines up with the old runway here. So this one, a different bridge altogether. At the end of the carriageway, there is another rectangular area. We can see by the shadow that it's been cut into the hillside, and I wonder if the Japanese were planning to build a second hangar here. Between the two crossings, up here in the northern corner of the airfield, there was another building built on top of a little hill here. It was the Japanese operations building for the airfield, and it was built in the shape of an upside down letter T. We're almost directly above it here, so we can't see the building in profile, but we can see the shadow, and the shadow shows that upside down letter T shape. The other new Japanese buildings are over on Hong Kong Island, so let's head south. We don't get to see them very clearly again because we are directly above them, but this is the new governor's residence that the Japanese built, and we can see from its shadow, we can see the tower here, and another large tower further up the hill. If we look for a white area of ground where a big construction project was underway, and again from the shadow we can see it was a tall tower, and this was the Japanese War Memorial. The final big construction project undertaken by the Japanese is largely hidden from sight, but I did hope that these photos would show some signs of it. I'm talking about the many tunnels they excavated in the hills in preparation for their defence against the Allied land forces that were expected to attack Hong Kong. Now, over on the Gulo website, readers have documented the tunnels they found around Hong Kong, adding a marker for each tunnel to this map. As you can see, lots of them. Again, let's make it full screen and bring back our aerial photo. So as you dig a tunnel, you've got the problem of what to do with all of the material that you dig out. Where do you put the soil and the rock that you've dug out? And I was hoping that we would see it as a sort of a smear down the hill of lighter colour. But looking at these ones, we're not really getting that at all. However, over here, there is what I was expecting to see. So the black, I believe, is the shadow where the entrance of the tunnel is cut into the hillside. And then the light coloured patch here is the rock and the soil that's been dug out and is running down the hillside. You can see there's a couple more along here. Now, we don't currently have any markers on these, so these aren't documented on Gulo. If we've got any tunnel explorers watching, this might be an area to go and take a closer look at. And while you're there, you can see there's a sharp corner here of a shadow, some sort of building. Let me just switch over to the main map with markers for everything. And this one is a pillbox, one of the British pillboxes. Here are some photos showing what survived. So the pillbox clearly very much in ruins, but there are still some signs of it to be seen. We've looked at the main Japanese construction projects. Now let's turn to the defences the British built starting with their pillboxes. Again, like the tunnels, there are lots of them. We make this a bit larger. Right, here's pillbox 202 again. And to the north is an unusual one. You can see pillbox 203, A and B. And if we zoom in, we can see that indeed there are two shadows here. So there were two pillboxes built next to each other. And the reason becomes clear if you look at the map. They were built on either side of the ridge. The alignment's not exact here, but we've got one on one side of the ridge looking this way, and one on this side of the ridge looking out this way. It's another one in the area that I'm more familiar with. Here we are, it's this one. It's pillbox number 126. It's quite close to the Gilwell campsite that the Scouts use, and I'd often pass it on hikes in this area when I was living at Sunpo Gong. You can see this one's quite distinct with its shadow. Now, apart from the shadows, another clue for locating pillboxes was introduced to us by Rob Weir, who's an expert on the subject. He notes that the pillboxes were resupplied by the British Army's mules, and the Army built zigzagging tracks to help the mules carry heavy loads up and down the steep slopes. And when Rob first started looking out for old pillboxes, those old trails were still visible. He says if he was out walking and he saw a zigzag shape on an opposite hillside, he knew there was a pillbox nearby. So we can use that. If we look over here, this is pillbox number 124, and this is a trail heading down the slope and following exactly the type of zigzag shape that Rob describes. Now, there were lots of pillboxes on Hong Kong Island too, as we can see, mostly built around the coastline. They were built to protect against Japanese forces landing on the island. Not as clear to see as the pillboxes in the New Territories though. So on the island I will switch to the much larger gun batteries, whose circular gun emplacements are easier to spot. I'll use Hong Kong University as a landmark. So this dark rectangle is their main hall, still with its roof at this point. And I've chosen Hong Kong U because there are a couple of British wartime batteries nearby, just downhill from the university. These dark circles here, these mark out the circular gun emplacements of the lower Belcher's battery, which was put out of action by Japanese attacks in December 1941. A little bit up the hill was the upper battery here. This one survived the fighting, but around the time of the British surrender, the British destroyed this battery so that it wouldn't fall into Japanese hands. Today this area is the site of the Belcher's housing estate, and no traces of the old batteries have survived. But if you don't mind walking uphill a little way, we've got the Pinewood battery over here, and its shapes are circular shapes are clear to see, and if you look at it on a modern map, then the circular shapes with the R for ruin are still there too. So it's a good spot to go up and have a wander around. For more information about any of the places here, we just turn the markers back on and visit the page. And then if you click down onto the tags for batteries, for example, you can see all of the batteries marked on the map. And then turn on the aerial photo again, and you can go exploring to see what traces you can spot. The next buildings that caught my attention are down at the eastern end of the island. They're in the valley that runs up behind the old Taiku docks. So here are the docks here. Here's the valley. And you can see there are lots of these rectangular shapes, and each of them has 2 rows of 5 grey dots. If we bring back the markers, You can see that these were wartime cooking stoves. They were built to feed the large number of refugees the British expected to see during an extended siege of the Hong Kong island. Now, the fighting ended much sooner than the British expected, but we know that these stoves were used because we have a report from the man in charge of them, Mr. Charles Mycock. He writes, on the 9th of December 1941, I was appointed Commandant of the Tai Kung Braemar Dispersal Area for Refugees. This consisted of 10 camps with essential buildings about the Mount Parker Road leading from Quarry Bay to Stanley. Headquarters were at the two houses Woodside, half a mile up the road, overlooking the China Sugar Refinery, he actually means the Tai Kung Sugar Refinery, and the Tai Kung Dockyard. The main kitchen was clearly marked with the Red Cross, observable to low-flying enemy planes, and from the 10th December onwards, refugees living in huts and temporary quarters, varying from 1,000 to 5,000, were fed 2 meals a day. So I guess Mycock's 10 camps correspond to the 10 rectangles that we can see on this section of the photo. The stoves are probably bigger than you're imagining. Let's take a closer look at this Area E. So here's the page for the Area E, one of those rectangles with the 10 grey patches. And if we look at the photos, well, here's a sharper photo, an aerial photo from 1949. And each of the little grey dots on our 1945 is actually a separate platform. And if you walk there today, the great thing is that the platforms still exist. So each platform has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 circular openings, and the idea was that you would feed wood into here and have a fire burning, and then up here you'd have large woks where you'd be cooking rice and other food. Well, with 8 woks per platform, 10 platforms per camp, and 10 camps overall, that means you've got the capacity to have 800 woks on the go at the same time. So that's a lot of cooking capacity. I've read that there were other camps on Hong Kong Island, but the only other location I knew about for sure was a camp near Maryknoll in Stanley, and unfortunately, like Stanley Camp, the area around Maryknoll was hidden by cloud when these 1945 photos were taken. So no chance to see the camp there, but I have been happy to find 3 new wartime cooking areas that I hadn't heard of before. For the first of them, I'm going to head back to Hong Kong University again. Let's hide the markers. So here's Hong Kong University. Let's switch to the modern map. Now if you imagine hiking up to the peak, you'd walk up out of the top, up University Drive, cross over Coatwall Road, and then you walk up Hatton Road. You go past the fire station, there's public toilets here, and then you've got some very dilapidated old buildings, the Ching Yun Garden. But if we bring back the 1945 aerial photo, we'll see the Ching Yun Garden site was originally one of those 80 wok cooking stations. Now I'm not sure exactly where the refugees would have lived in this case, perhaps in the grounds of the university. I wonder if that was the plan. The next one we found is down at Aberdeen. So this hill here, this is Brick Hill, this is where Ocean Park is today, and then down at this side, unfortunately it's got one of the watermarks over the top, but this is another of the 10 grey patches, another 80 wok cooking section, and this one has several huts nearby, possibly for accommodation, possibly stores for food. I can see they've been painted with camouflage paint, which makes me think they probably were used by the Japanese for something, as the Japanese were quite fond of covering their buildings in camouflage paint like this. The third cooking site that's new to me is not too far away. It's over at Deepwater Bay. So here's the bay with the beach. Then behind that we've got the flat land of the golf course. And then in this hillside, just a little way up the slope, another of these 80 wok cooking stoves. The idea for this one is easier to guess. You've got all the flat land of the golf course here, and you can imagine it being used for tents for refugees. I don't think it ever was, though, because we have a report of army bakers who were based at Deepwater Bay, and they set up ovens during the period of fighting. This is where the bread for the British Army was being baked. Now, of these 3 sites that are new to me, I don't believe there are any traces of them surviving today, but if you have any information, maybe post-war photos of them, or any stories or reports about whether they were actually ever used, then please do let us know. Something related is over towards Sec O. So this is the road heading out to Sec O. And I noticed another group of buildings here, not the cooking stoves this time, some sort of huts. If we look on the modern maps, the outlines of the buildings are still there. But if you switch to a satellite view, then there isn't much to see. Perhaps just some floors, but the buildings are long gone. So again, if it's something that you've come across, you know what these were used for, then please let us know in the comments. Leaving the British preparations for war, we turn to the Americans to see if we can spot any of the results of their bombing raids. We'll start with a couple of buildings on either side of Kennedy Road, just near the Peak Tram. It's fairly easy to spot. We can look for the straight line. Here we go. This is the Peak Tram line running here. And this light area here and here is either side of Kennedy Road. Now the buildings nearby, you can see, are all very regular. Lots of sharp corners, 90-degree turns. And then over here, this looks much rougher. These are bomb sites with rubble. I've read that at the end of the fighting in 1941, Union Church was still standing. So I believe that this destruction has happened during one of the American bombing raids. The damage here quite localized, but another bombing raid hit a much larger area. So let's head over the harbour towards Hong Kong. Remember, we've got the dockyards here, and there's lots of housing in the area for people who worked at the dockyard. Well, in the previous year, 16th of October 1944, American bombers flew south towards Hong Kong, and the intention was to hit the dockyards here, but let's see what actually happened. Now, they took quite a lot of photos during the raid. We've got several on Gulo. If we look at the first one here, and we'll zoom in to get a closer look. Now you can see they write 77% of bombs were in target. This is their bombing of the Kowloon docks. Make it a bit larger so we can see it more easily. I think that's an exaggeration. The dockyard area is here. But you can see that most of the bombs have fallen short, and unfortunately they've fallen on those residential areas here. So when we switch back to the map, we can see a lot of the housing here destroyed, and there were many civilians were killed during that raid. Coming ahead to mid-January 1945, just a few weeks before this photo was taken, there was the biggest of all the American air raids on Hong Kong. And it was very different from the previous raids for a couple of reasons, and we'll need to look at the bigger picture to understand why. Now the government map doesn't extend to where we need, so let's switch to a different map. So up till the end of 1944, all the bombing raids over Hong Kong were carried out by the US Air Force. They were based on airfields in China, and they'd fly south and attack Hong Kong. But the planes raiding Hong Kong on the 15th and 16th of January 1945 belonged to the US Navy. They were flying from their aircraft carriers. So at that time, the American campaign to retake the Philippines was underway, and they were very worried that it would be interrupted by Japanese attacks. So a carrier force was sent into the South China Sea and given the task of striking any Japanese airfields, any Japanese shipping in the region that was in range of the Philippines. The US Navy pilots struck Japanese airfields and shipping in Okinawa, Formosa, today's Taiwan, on Luzon in the Philippines, and down as far as French Indochina, Vietnam today, and then back up to Hainan and Japanese bases in southern China, and of course Hong Kong. Now those raids on Hong Kong sank Japanese ships. They also damaged Kai Tak, Kowloon and Taikoo dockyards. And I think this pale line here is one of the wrecked ships. It's just in front of Western Market here, and I think we're looking at a ship on its side in the water. So if you can spot any other of the results of the January air raids, then again, let us know in the comments below. There is one last type of wartime damage that had nothing to do with air raids at all. Hong Kong's buildings also suffered from looters in search of firewood. Now, the biggest pieces of wood in a building are the beams that hold up the roof. So if you want to find those looted buildings, you just look out for buildings that are missing their roof. There's an example not far from the Union Church. So here's our Union Church site again. And then up on McDonald Road, you see this building here. And it's got this sort of geometric pattern looking a bit like a game of Tetris. And what it means is the roof is gone and we're looking down at the interior walls inside the building. Now, after the war, many of these looted buildings were demolished and rebuilt, and that's what happened to this one. So before the war, this was the site of Budley, and then see damage during the war, and rebuilt as Yip Mansion in 1950. Other buildings were refurbished after the war and put back into use, and there's a good example over at the top of Western Street. Let's just hide the markers. Over near Hong Kong U. So here's Western Street, and this is where it meets Bonham Road, and you can see a roofless building here, not just because we can see the interior walls, but can you see how the sun is shining, and through its shadow here we can see the windows on the 3 levels of the building. This then is King's College, but after the war this building was repaired and put back into use and still stands today, and in fact will soon be celebrating an important birthday. So King's College turns 100 this year. Aerial photos then are a wonderful tool for exploring history. You know, we rely on maps a lot of the time, but there are occasions when you're not quite sure if the map is 100% accurate. Photos give us an exact snapshot of Hong Kong on a given date. And they also show more remote areas that were rarely visited by the map makers. We can look back to that area of Sai Kung for an example. Let's look at Sai Kung on a modern map. We can make out the old Sai Kung just by the fact the buildings are so tightly packed and the roads don't follow the neat geometric patterns of the more modern buildings. But the easiest way to understand the layout is to go back to the 1945 pictures, and there you can see the shape of the streets and the buildings very much matches the shape of the headland that Sai Kung is built on. There's lots more to explore if you're interested in the area. I knew Sai Kung was a busy place, but I didn't realise that there were other pretty large settlements as well. This one is Sa Kok Mei, and then we've got Ho Chung down here as well. You know, today these just disappear into all of the sprawl of buildings around here, but they look very clear on the old pictures. I also had in mind that Sai Kung was very remote in the early 1940s and only really accessible by sea, but that's not true either. You can see the Clearwater Bay Road and then a road branching off and running up to Sai Kung. And then there's also these 2 roads heading up into the hills. If we just bring the markers back, it looks like there's some construction going on here just by the the freshly turned earth, and there was a Japanese pillbox built there, so I wonder what the Japanese were doing in this area. The last little thing that caught my eye is just how clear all of the paddy fields are on these old pictures. Now if we switch to a satellite view today, then they're invisible. Apparently they've been lost forever, but at some point they've been painstakingly mapped by the government, and so if we switch to the government map, you can see the outline of them is still quite clearly shown, right down to the individual paddy field. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this look at the aerial photos and a glimpse of Hong Kong during the Japanese occupation. Here are some more resources if you'd like to dig deeper. For starters, let's just have a quick run through the GULA website again. This is the link that you want to come to. So this shows the maps, and then this is where you can turn on or off the markers and also choose to show the aerial photos. Next is the Japanese Occupation of Hong Kong website. This is a project run by Professor Kwong Chi Man at the Hong Kong Baptist University, and there's a wealth of information here if you're interested in the 3 years, 8 months of the Japanese occupation. Now you'll notice that these are exactly the same 1945 aerial photos we've just been looking at. The photos were originally sourced for use in this project here, and a big thank you to Professor Kwong for allowing me to use them on the GULA website. Turning to print, Philip Snow's book, The Fall of Hong Kong, is an excellent resource for more information about life in Hong Kong during the occupation years. Or if you prefer video, take a look at the SCMP's video about Project Avenger. Craig Mitchell, seen here, tracked down the crash site of one of the American planes from the air raid on 16th of January 1945. And the video covers that, plus the multidisciplinary team that then investigated the crash site in depth. Finally, there's the first video I recorded about Hong Kong in wartime. It covers similar themes to today's video, but uses photos taken at ground level, not the aerial photos we've looked at here. I'll put links to all those different resources in the notes below. Well, that wraps up this video. Thank you very much for watching.